The desert wind whispered against the hangar walls like a restless spirit seeking entry. Night had fallen over Casablanca, yet the airstrip throbbed with a strange and uneasy stillness. Lanterns flickered along the runway, casting long shadows across the sand, as though the darkness wished to conceal what had just transpired. Near the silver monoplane, Étoile Filante, lay the body of renowned French aviator Captain Henri Delacroix, sprawled beside the open cockpit, goggles cracked, one hand outstretched towards the night sky. Chapter 1. The Fallen Aviator. The desert night over Casablanca exhaled a slow, uneasy breath. A thin veil of sand drifted across the tarmac like ghosts lingering at the edge of lantern light, disturbed now and then by the far-off roar of a passing gust. But inside Hangar Number 3, one of the French-protected airstrip's most vital enclosures, there was no movement at all. Only a heavy stillness, the kind of stillness that belongs to newly committed sin. The silver monoplane Étoile Filante dominated the center of the space like a metallic altar, its polished fuselage reflecting the golden burn of the lanterns. Its wings were spread as though yearning for dawn, for flight, for the endless horizon beyond the Atlantic winds. Instead, beneath its sleek form lay a broken man. Captain Henri Delacroix, the aviator whose name had graced every Paris newspaper for months, lay sprawled unnaturally on the ground, his head twisted slightly to one side. His flight goggles rested cracked upon the floor beside him, one lens splintered like a spiderweb frozen in glass. The desert sand around him was still settling, forming a faint halo around the contours of his fallen figure. And standing beside him, arms folded, his silhouette crisp as a cutout against the lantern glow, was Hercule Poirot. His posture was immaculate, even in the wind, his shoes polished to a shine that the desert dust dared not challenge. His moustache, luxurious, deliberate, and symmetrical, did not so much as flutter in the breeze. Only his dark, intelligent eyes moved, their gaze sweeping over every disturbance in the hangar. Inspector Renaud paced nearby, wringing his hands so vigorously it seemed a wonder they had not dissolved into thin air. He glanced repeatedly between the dead aviator and Poirot, as though praying for the Belgian detective to speak first, to breathe some clarity into the frightening tableau. But Poirot waited. He observed. He let the stillness tell its story. At last, he knelt with the careful precision of a man folding an expensive suit, and extended one gloved hand toward Delacroix's jacket, not touching, merely hovering inches above the fabric. Poirot murmured, studying the angle of the captain's arm, the pattern of sand displaced beneath him, the unnatural stiffness in his neck. This, mes amis, is not the scene of an accident. Renaud blanched. Not an accident, but Captain Delacroix. He was preparing for his flight. Perhaps he fell from the cockpit. Poirot raised a single finger. Non. The word landed with the finality of a judge's gavel. Poirot leaned closer. Observe, please, the wound at his temple. Sharp-edged, concentrated, delivered with precision. A fall from the cockpit would leave abrasions, scrapes, even broken bones. But here, only one blow, and the sand beneath him. Poirot brushed lightly at the ground. It is disturbed only after the body came to rest. You see the drag marks. Someone moved him. Renaud swallowed hard. Moved? After he died? Or as he was dying, Poirot replied, though it changes little. The body is not where the fatal blow was struck. The inspector grew paler by the second. Sweat trickled from his brow, making shining streaks through the accumulating dust. Dear God, a murder on a military airfield. Poirot stood, brushing non-existent dirt from his trousers. And one with very careful planning, he said softly. He turned his head, gaze sweeping across the corners of the hangar. 3 figures stood there, watching, listening, each wearing a mask, though Poirot suspected masks were merely a less elegant term for truth waiting to be revealed. The first was a woman in a cream-coloured coat and burgundy scarf, her hair pinned in soft waves that framed a face too pale for the warm climate. Madeleine Arnaud, the aviator's betrothed. Her hands, covered in elegant kid-leather gloves, were clasped tightly before her, as though she feared the world might shatter beneath her feet. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but dry. Not quite grief, not quite shock, something else. Next to her stood Colonel Victor Dumont, his stern posture as rigid as the metal beams supporting the hangar. His military uniform was immaculate, but a small streak of engine grease marred his left cuff. A detail Poirot noted with interest. His jaw was locked, his demeanour cold. His dark eyes flicked with calculating concern across the hangar floor. The final figure was Etienne Morel, the lanky mechanic with oil-stained hands and nervous energy radiating like heat off desert stone. His fingers fidgeted compulsively with a battered cap. His gaze darted between Poirot, the colonel, and the fallen aviator, as though terrified of each in equal measure. Poirot took one slow breath. Here they were, the circle of proximity, the trio closest to Delacroix, both in life and perhaps his death. Poirot approached the body once more, paying special attention to the area beneath the cockpit. Something caught his eye, a glint of fabric half tucked into the latch of the open cockpit door. He pinched it delicately between his fingertips and examined it beneath the lantern. A torn strip of silk. Burgundy red. Poirot did not look at Madeleine, but he knew the colour matched her scarf precisely. He slipped the fabric into an envelope. Now Poirot turned to face the 3 observers. "Inspector Renaud," he said smoothly, "you will secure the hangar. No one enters, no one leaves." Renaud nodded and barked orders to 2 officers. Poirot's gaze drifted to Madeleine. "Mademoiselle Arnaud," he said, voice gentle yet piercing, "you were to dine with Captain Delacroix this evening, were you not?" She swallowed. "Yes, Monsieur Poirot, but I arrived here only after receiving the dreadful telephone call." Poirot hummed. "And your scarf? I believe it is missing a corner." Her eyes widened a fraction. "My scarf? I must have lost it earlier today. Casablanca's winds are fierce. Perhaps it was pulled." Poirot held up a hand. "We shall return to this question." He then faced Colonel Dumont. "Colonel, you were here on the airfield this evening?" Dumont's voice carried authority even now. "Of course. Delacroix's flight preparations fall under military oversight. He was planning a new route of strategic significance. I check his progress daily." Poirot nodded slowly. "And did you speak with him tonight?" Dumont hesitated, just for a heartbeat. But Poirot noticed. "We exchanged words earlier," Dumont admitted. "He wished to alter the timing of his departure. I advised against it." Poirot's eyes lingered on the smudge of grease on his cuff. "Did you assist with any mechanical adjustments?" "No," Dumont said sharply. "I am a liaison, not a mechanic." Poirot's gaze shifted to Etienne Morel. "And you, Monsieur Morel," Poirot said softly. "You knew the captain well, did you not?" Morel swallowed. "He relied on me for every bolt and wire of the étoile filante. He trusted me. He was like an older brother." His voice cracked slightly. He didn't deserve this. Poirot watched him closely. Tell me, when did you last see him alive? Morel fidgeted. Earlier this evening, around sunset. He seemed troubled, distracted, as though anticipating something unpleasant. Poirot nodded. Did he confide any worries to you? Morel hesitated. Dumont's eyes narrowed on him. Madeleine watched him with frightened curiosity. Morel finally murmured, Only that he feared sabotage, someone tampering with his instruments. A ripple went through the hangar. Poirot's gaze sharpened. Sabotage, he repeated quietly. And did he suspect who? Morel shook his head too quickly. No, he never said. Poirot's eyebrow rose, but he let the answer stand, for now. Thunder rumbled faintly in the distance. The heavy scent of impending rain drifted through the hangar's open doors. Poirot turned back to the monoplane and examined its frame. Lantern light glinted off metal. He touched the edge of the cockpit, noticing tiny scratches, fresh ones, near the latch where the silk had been caught. He murmured, The silk is torn. That could happen in a struggle, or while fleeing quickly. He circled the plane, each step placed with meticulous intention. A faint impression in the sand caught his gaze. 2 footprints, small and narrow, with a distinct taper at the heel. Poirot did not look at Madeleine, but he felt her shift uncomfortably. Yet something else troubled him more than the footprints, or the torn silk. The air inside the hangar held a faint scent. Burnt oil mixed with a metallic note he recognized only from mechanical failure. It lingered near the instrument panel. Poirot's eyes drifted upward to the altimeter. He stepped into the cockpit, leaned forward, and traced one fingertip along the instrument's casing. Fresh scratches again. Someone, Poirot whispered to himself, has interfered where they had no right. Lightning crackled somewhere beyond the airfield. Poirot stepped down from the cockpit and let his fingers run across the fuselage. A story was forming, not a complete one, but the shape of one. He returned to the group. Poirot clasped his hands behind his back. There are 3 of you who saw Captain Delacroix within the last hours of his life. 3 of you who had reason, personal, professional, or emotional, to experience conflict with him. Madeleine flinched. Dumont stiffened. Morel's hands trembled. Poirot continued, voice steady as stone. Delacroix was struck by someone who stood within arm's reach, someone who wished to silence him, someone who believed moving the body would conceal their crime. Poirot's gaze swept across their faces. You must understand, he said quietly, the truth always has a way of shining through even the darkest desert night. Renaud approached Poirot. Monsieur Poirot, what do you need from us? Poirot paused for a long moment, eyes drifting once again to the torn silk in his pocket, then to the footprint, then to the altimeter. He responded in a low, deliberate tone. What I need, Inspector, is to speak with each of these 3 alone. The storm outside intensified. As the lanterns flickered, Poirot added softly, and perhaps with one other person, someone who may have seen far more than he realized. Renaud blinked. Who? Poirot turned toward the far end of the hangar, where a lone figure stood watching from the shadows. The night watchman, Abdel-Karim. Poirot's voice drifted across the air like a whisper of judgment. For if Captain Delacroix argued with someone tonight, this man would know. The lanterns flickered again, and the storm began. Chapter 2. A Triangle of Motives. The storm broke with a suddenness that rattled the metal panels of the hangar. Rain hammered the roof like 1,000 impatient knuckles. while the wind lashed through the cracks in shrill, ghostly howls, a chorus of nature, furious and unrestrained. Inside, lanterns trembled in their iron hooks, shadows dancing wickedly across the walls. Inspector Renault closed the hangar doors with difficulty, cursing under his breath as Poirot watched silently, fingertips pressed together. The Belgian detective loved order, and storms, whether of weather or circumstance, were the sworn enemies of order. He walked toward the small office attached to the hangar, its windows fogged and the faint scent of typewriter ink hanging in the air. A single lantern illuminated the narrow desk. Files were stacked neatly, flight plans, clearance signatures, maintenance logs, the mundane documentation of a life dedicated to the sky. But tonight, the air itself felt conspiratorial. Poirot gestured to Inspector Renault. "Bring in Mademoiselle Arnaud first," he said softly. She entered with the fragile composure of a porcelain figure. Her coat, dotted with rain, clung to her trembling frame. The burgundy scarf wrapped around her neck seemed to pull tighter, as if aware a piece of it lay in Poirot's pocket. She sat. Renault closed the office door. Poirot remained standing, hands folded behind his back. "Mademoiselle," he began, "you are to meet the captain for dinner tonight." She nodded, but her eyes drifted toward the rain-soaked windows. "Yes, we had a reservation at Le Phare." A small celebration, you might say. Henri wished to toast his success before the long flight. He always became sentimental before a new journey. Poirot tilted his head. "Yet you did not dine together." "No." Her voice wavered. "I waited at the restaurant. He was late. Henri is never late, not even by minutes." "And what did you do then?" "I telephoned the airfield. When no one answered, She swallowed. "I felt something was wrong. I came here immediately." Poirot nodded slowly, pacing a small, precise circle around her. "You cared deeply for him." "I loved him," she whispered, tears pooling, "though Henri was a dreamer, a spirit half-woven from clouds and ambition. I feared his flights, but I never tried to stop him." Poirot retrieved the small envelope from his jacket pocket. He removed the torn strip of burgundy silk and set it gently upon the desk. Madeleine's breath caught. She stared at the fabric as if it were a severed limb. "Your scarf, mademoiselle," Poirot said quietly. Yes, perhaps, but I do not know how—" He raised a finger. "Please, the truth." Her hands twisted together, shaking. "This morning, during our walk along the port, the scarf snagged on a nail. I remember it clearly. Henri teased me for being dramatic when it tore. I meant to mend it." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "But the tear, mademoiselle, this one, is fresh. The fibres show strain. It was not caused by a nail, but by force." She blinked rapidly. "Force? No, I do not understand." Poirot studied her face. He watched the tremor at the corners of her eyes, the tightness in her jaw, the pallor creeping beneath her powdered cheeks. "You argued with Captain Delacroix recently, did you not?" Madeleine's lips parted, first in surprise, then in reluctant acceptance. "Yes," she whispered, "these past weeks have been difficult." He felt pressure from many sides, military, sponsors, newspapers, and I felt forgotten, overshadowed by his fame. "And so," Poirot encouraged, "we argued last night. Not here, at my home. He told me he had discovered something troubling, something he could not yet confess. I pressed him. He refused. We quarrelled. I told him to leave." Her voice cracked. Poirot stopped pacing. "Did you follow him to the airfield?" "No," she exclaimed. "I swear it. We parted on bitter terms, but I never imagined—" She dissolved into quiet sobs. Poirot regarded her silently for several moments. Her grief, whether genuine or well-performed, was untouched by malice. But a quarrel, a torn scarf, a fiancé found dead, these were ingredients in the recipe of motive. He gently folded the fabric and returned it to the envelope. "You may rest outside, mademoiselle," he said finally, "but do not leave the airfield." She nodded weakly and exited, tears still shimmering on her lashes. Poirot exhaled. One suspect interviewed, 2 remained. The colonel entered like a man accustomed to command. His boots struck the floor with disciplined rhythm. His back remained perfectly straight. His jaw clenched tight enough to crack stone. "Poirot," he said with a curt nod, "let us be direct. You suspect me. I see it in your eyes." Poirot smiled faintly. "I suspect everyone, mon colonel. It is a habit of my profession." Dumont huffed. "Then allow me to clear myself quickly. I had a disagreement with Captain Delacroix, yes, but it was a matter of protocol, not violence." Poirot gestured to the chair. "Sit." The colonel did not. He remained standing, rigid as a flagpole. Poirot paced away from him, studying the rows of documents on the desk. "Tell me of your argument." "It concerned military secrecy," Dumont said. "Delacroix's new route from Casablanca to Dakar passes near sensitive territories. It is essential the details not fall into the wrong hands." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "And yet, Delacroix wished to announce it?" Dumont's lips tightened. "He believed transparency would bring glory. I believed discretion would bring safety." Poirot circled him slowly. "Glory versus discretion. A conflict of ideologies." "Not murder," Dumont said sharply. Poirot's eyes drifted to the grease stain on the colonel's cuff. "You maintain you did not assist with maintenance of the aircraft?" "I did not." "And yet you bear the stain of engine grease." Dumont's face stiffened. "I walked past the plane earlier. The mechanic brushed past me with an oil can. It must have—" Poirot raised a finger. "Perhaps." He stepped closer. "What time did you last see Captain Delacroix alive?" "Around 20 Dumont said. "I came to verify that the documents concerning his route were secured. The captain was distracted, irritated. He brushed aside my questions. I left." "You did not see him again?" "No." Poirot studied the colonel's posture. Stiff, defensive, but not fearful. Dumont was a man who lived within rigid boundaries. A man who justified many actions for the sake of France. But he did not bear the trembling guilt of a fresh killer. Poirot stepped back. "Colonel, were you aware of any espionage threats regarding Delacroix's flight?" Dumont's nostrils flared. "There have been whispers. Nothing concrete." "And did the captain mention suspicions to you?" Dumont paused. The storm beat against the roof. He said only that he believed someone close to the airfield was too curious. Poirot nodded, filing the detail meticulously away. "You may go, mon colonel," he said softly, "but remain available." Dumont gave a stiff bow of the head and departed. Poirot waited until the footsteps faded before allowing his shoulders to relax. 2 interviews, 2 incomplete truths. He turned his attention to the last suspect. "Bring in Morel," he said. The mechanic entered with the look of a man expecting execution. His cap twisted nervously between his fingers as he sat, hunching in the chair as though trying to make himself smaller. Poirot observed him carefully. Morel's eyes were red-rimmed, his hair matted from rain, his breath shaky. "You worked closely with Captain Delacroix?" Poirot began. "Yes," Morel murmured, "every day." "You admired him?" Morel nodded, his throat bobbing. He was like a hero, and kind. He always listened when I spoke, Not many do. Poirot folded his arms. Monsieur Morel, you told Inspector Renaud that the captain seemed troubled tonight. Distracted. Explain. The mechanic hesitated, glancing at the door as if checking whether someone might be listening. At last he whispered, He told me he feared sabotage. Someone had tampered with his instruments. Poirot leaned in. And why did you not report this immediately? Morel's voice cracked. Because he asked me not to. He said he needed to gather proof first. He didn't want to accuse anyone without certainty. Poirot's brow rose. A curious choice, particularly for a man about to fly at dawn. Morel's hands tightened on the cap. Poirot watched him with growing interest. You knew the plane intimately. You would immediately recognize sabotage. Yes. And if you found evidence of tampering tonight? I did not. Poirot leaned closer. Monsieur Morel, you are lying. The mechanic's breath hitched. Sweat formed along his hairline. He swallowed. I found scratches on the altimeter housing. Fresh scratches. They weren't there this morning. And you told no one. I was terrified, Morel whispered. The colonel, he has been pressuring Delacroix for weeks. And Madeleine, she was angry with Henri. Everyone seemed tense. I didn't know who to trust. Poirot considered this. You feared, he said gently, that someone might think you responsible. Morel nodded, tears forming. If anything is wrong with the plane, they always look to the mechanic first. Poirot extended a soft sigh. Morel was nervous, yes, hiding secrets certainly, but the nature of his fear seemed rooted in guilt of silence, not guilt of violence. Still, there was one final question lingering like smoke. Tell me, Monsieur Morel, Poirot said quietly, did you see Captain Delacroix after sunset? Morel froze. I heard him. Poirot's gaze sharpened. Go on. I was in my workshop cleaning tools. The storm was beginning. I heard voices, harsh, angry, outside near the hangar doors. One was Henri, the other, yes, the other voice belonged to a woman. Poirot's pulse quickened. Are you certain? Absolutely, Morel whispered. I heard her shout something like, You cannot hide this from me. I thought it was Mademoiselle Arnaud. Poirot absorbed the words in silence. A woman, angry, at the hangar, with Delacroix, the torn scarf, the footprint by the plane, the argument overheard. The fiancée who claimed she was waiting at a restaurant. Poirot rose slowly. That is all for now, Monsieur Morel, he said. You have been most helpful. Morel shuffled out, shoulders drooping. Poirot remained alone in the office as the storm continued its relentless assault on the roof. He stood completely still for several minutes, every detail in his mind settling, aligning, forming patterns. 3 suspects, 3 motives, but one fact now pulsed at the center of the mystery, like the beating of a heart. Someone was lying about where they had been tonight. Someone had met Delacroix in the dark hours. Someone had fought with him. Someone had moved his body. Poirot closed his eyes. And someone had left behind a torn piece of silk. But Poirot, master of order and symmetry, knew better than to assume the most obvious suspect was the true culprit. Red herrings were as natural to murder as rain was to storms. A knock sounded at the door. Renaud entered, face flushed. Poirot, there's someone who wishes to speak with you. Poirot arched an eyebrow. Who? The night watchman, Abdelkarim. He says he saw something. Poirot allowed himself a rare smile. Inspector, bring him to me at once. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows. And the mystery deepened. Chapter 3. The Night Watchman Speaks. The night watchman entered with the hesitant shuffle of a man long accustomed to being overlooked. Abdelkarim was slight, weathered, and wrapped in a coat several sizes too large, its hem brushing against his boots. His eyes, dark and alert, flicked between Poirot and Inspector Renaud, with wary intelligence. Poirot greeted him with a courteous nod. "Monsieur Karim, I am told you witnessed something tonight. Please sit." The watchman obeyed, placing his cap on his knee. Rain drummed on the roof, punctuating the silence. "Tell me," Poirot said softly, "what did you see?" Karim took a slow breath. "It began just before the storm arrived. I was making my rounds. The airfield was quiet, too quiet for an evening before a long-distance flight. Captain Delacroix, he usually works late, polishing his equipment, walking around the hangar. But tonight, the atmosphere felt tense." Poirot leaned forward, his gaze intent. "Go on." "I passed the main hangar," Karim continued, "and I saw a person standing near the captain's aircraft. Their figure was small, slender, wearing a long coat. I could not see the face clearly. The wind was strong, and the lantern swung wildly." Poirot's mind flickered through silhouettes. Madeleine, a stranger, or someone dressed to mislead. "And what was this person doing?" Poirot asked. "They were near the cockpit," Karim said. "Very close, too close. It looked as if they were touching something on the frame, checking or tampering." Inspector Renaud let out a sharp breath, but Poirot lifted a hand to silence him. "Monsieur," Poirot asked calmly, "why did you not confront this person?" Karim looked down at his cap. "Because I thought it was Captain Delacroix himself. He sometimes wore a long coat in bad weather." He paused, but then I saw the captain appear from the other side of the hangar. He walked fast, angry. He shouted something. I could not make out the words. Poirot's eyes narrowed. So the captain confronted this mysterious visitor. "Yes. And then?" Karim hesitated, fingers tightening around the worn fabric of his cap. "They argued, not loud but sharp. You know the sound of a blade scraping stone, like that." The wind carried away most of the words, but I heard the captain say, "You should not be here." And the other voice, higher though muffled, said, "You forced my hand." Poirot exchanged a glance with Renaud. "A woman's voice?" Poirot asked. "I believe so, yes," Karim whispered. A crack of thunder shook the building. Poirot waited, patient and still as carved marble. What happened next? "I left to fetch my lantern," Karim said. "The storm was rising, and the light was failing. When I returned moments later, the two were gone. I searched the area but found no one." "And the body?" Karim swallowed. "I did not find Captain Delacroix until much later, after the storm had fully come. I thought he was preparing for flight. I approached to offer assistance. Then I saw the blood." His voice quivered. "I sent for the inspector immediately." Poirot nodded, absorbing every detail. "One more question, monsieur," Poirot said. "Did you notice the direction in which the mysterious visitor fled?" Karim frowned in thought. "Toward the storage sheds. Beyond them lies only the access road and the sea cliffs." Poirot tapped a finger against his lips. "The cliffs," he murmured. "Convenient places for concealment or escape." Karim's voice grew softer. "Monsieur Poirot, Captain Delacroix was a good man. Please find who did this." Poirot bowed his head. "I assure you, monsieur, justice will be served." Renaud escorted the watchman out. The moment the door shut, Poirot began walking small, rapid, agitated steps that signaled the engine of his little grey cells was stirring to life. "Poirot," Renaud said cautiously, "this changes everything. A woman was here tonight, and Delacroix argued with her. That points directly to Mademoiselle Arnaud." Poirot halted. "Non, mon ami. It points to opportunity, not guilt. We must not jump to conclusions like frightened rabbits." Renaud folded his arms. Then who else? A stranger. There were no unauthorized entries. Poirot lifted a finger, unless the person was not unauthorized. Renaud blinked. You mean someone familiar? Someone who could move freely at the airfield? Poirot smiled faintly. Exactement. The thunder rolled again, this time like distant artillery. Poirot pulled the torn scarf from its envelope. Under the lantern light, its fibres shimmered like threads of accusation. A torn scarf, a quarrel overheard, an unknown woman at the plane, a frightened mechanic who fears he knows more than he admits. Poirot sighed. The truth, she hides inside a nest of contradictions. Renaud rubbed the back of his neck. Where do we begin? Poirot straightened, his posture suddenly crisp, energized. Fetch Mademoiselle Arnaud. Renaud hesitated. Do you intend to accuse her? Poirot shook his head. No. I intend to see if she lies again. And, Inspector, he smiled thinly, I suspect she will. The inspector left at once. Poirot stood alone, listening to the storm thunder like a war drum. The airship hangar creaked, its beams groaning in protest against the raging wind. Poirot closed his eyes. Something about Karim's testimony, though valuable, felt incomplete, as if he had told the truth, but not the whole truth. A man like Karim saw everything. The nature of his work demanded it. Yet he had spoken as if afraid to reveal too much. Fear was its own clue. Poirot walked to the fogged window, wiping a clear patch with his palm. Beyond, the runway lay slick and gleaming, the lights distorted by rain. Shadows ran between hangars like fleeing spirits. Poirot's eyes sharpened. The storage sheds, he murmured. If the mysterious woman fled there, then perhaps she left traces of her presence. The door opened. Renaud returned, rain dripping from his coat. Madeleine is on her way, he said. She is distraught. Poirot nodded. Good. A distraught mind reveals more truth than a composed one. As Renaud frowned, Poirot adjusted his cuffs. And after we speak with her, he added, we will visit the sheds. For what? Poirot's expression turned grave. For whatever the killer hoped, we would never find. The storm roared on, the night deepened, and Poirot moved closer to the heart of the truth. Chapter 4. Madeleine's Tears and the Footprints in the Rain. Madeleine Arnaud entered the hangar like a ghost pressed into human shape. Her cheeks were wet, though whether from rain or tears was impossible to tell. Her dark hair clung to her forehead, and her gloves trembled as she pulled them off, dropping them onto a chair without noticing. Poirot regarded her with careful neutrality. Mademoiselle, please sit. You are cold, exhausted, and grieving. None of these things are conducive to clear thought. She sank onto the offered chair, her eyes flickering briefly toward Delacroix's covered body in the corner. A soft gasp escaped her, fragile as a candle flame in wind. Inspector Renaud tells me, Poirot began, that you care deeply for Captain Delacroix. Her chin lifted just slightly, enough for dignity, but not defiance. Yes, I did, though he did not. She stopped herself. No, that is unkind. Jacques was a complicated man. Poirot's voice softened, but not his scrutiny. Love is always complicated, is it not? She blinked, a tear slipping down her cheek. I thought, perhaps tonight he would finally see that life is not only adventure and glory, that there are people who wait for him, who want him safe. Poirot observed her closely. She spoke with sorrow, yes, but not the sharp, raw wound of guilt. Tell me, mademoiselle, he said quietly, where were you at the time of his death? She hesitated. Renaud stepped forward. Answer him. I was here, she whispered, near the hangar. I came to see Jacques before his flight. Her breath wavered. I feared it might be my last chance. He had been distant, and our argument earlier. Poirot pounced gently. You did not mention this before. Her hands shook in her lap. I did not want to tarnish his memory with our quarrel. It was foolish, jealous even. There were rumors about the American woman in Casablanca. Poirot waved a hand. Gossip does not interest me, only facts. She swallowed hard. Jacques told me he was taking on a dangerous commission, something involving a parcel he was to deliver in Spain. He refused to tell me more. It frightened me. Did you confront him about it tonight? Poirot asked. Yes. She closed her eyes. He said only that it was too late to change course. And then he walked away from me. He was angered. I thought it best to give him space. Poirot paced slowly. And after this argument, you left? I walked toward the storage sheds. I wanted to calm myself before speaking to him again. She fidgeted with the hem of her skirt. When the storm strengthened, I returned to the hangar to find him, only to see men running, shouting. Her voice broke, and then I saw him on the ground. Poirot waited until the wave of grief passed. Tell me, he said softly, did you see anyone else near the sheds? Anyone fleeing? She shook her head. The storm was too strong, the wind so loud. I heard footsteps once, light footsteps, but I could not see through the rain. Poirot stopped pacing. Light footsteps, he repeated, not heavy, not hurried, just present. Madeleine nodded timidly. Renaud leaned toward Poirot. This matches the watchman's statement. Indeed. Poirot steepled his fingers. Mademoiselle, one more question. Did you, at any time, go near the cockpit of Jacques' aircraft? Perhaps earlier in the evening? Her eyes widened. No, never. I would not dare. Jacques said one careless touch could cost a man his life. Poirot's gaze flicked to her gloves. Fine leather, the fingertips slightly darkened by moisture. You are sure? He pressed. Absolutely. Poirot inclined his head. Merci, mademoiselle. That is all. Renaud escorted her outside, shielding her from the worst of the downpour. Poirot remained still, staring at the puddles forming between the crates and tool benches. Then he moved, swiftly. He crossed to the hangar entrance, where rain hammered the earth into mud. A narrow path led toward the storage sheds, the very direction Karim and Madeleine had both mentioned. Under the yellow glow of the lanterns, the ground was pocked with footprints. Most were smudged beyond recognition, but one set remained distinct enough to note. Poirot knelt, his knees sinking slightly into the wet earth. Small, he murmured, narrow heel, short stride, a woman's footprint. Renaud returned through the rain just as Poirot stood. You found something? The inspector asked. Poirot pointed. Observe, the evidence that mocks us from beneath our very feet. Renaud squinted. Women's prints? Could be Madeleine. Poirot shook his head. No, look closer. Madeleine wears shoes with smooth soles. Fashionable, elegant. See how the rain pools evenly around her tracks. He pointed again, this time to the distinct impressions. These, however, show a cross-hatched pattern. A utilitarian design, not French, American, or perhaps British. Renaud's eyes widened. Then who? Poirot held up a hand. Before we ask who, we must ask why they were here. He stepped carefully along the line of prints, following them toward the sheds. The storm had tried its best to erase them, but some remained stubbornly etched into the mud. They led to a small shed whose door hung open, battered by wind. Inside, Poirot raised his lantern. The interior smelled of rust and salt. Tools hung neatly, untouched. But in the corner, almost invisible, lay a scrap of fabric caught on a nail. Poirot plucked it free, holding it to the light. A coarse thread, dark blue. He compared it to the torn scarf from the crime scene. Not a match, he whispered. Another fabric, another clue. Renaud looked bewildered. So now we have two different textiles, a scarf and this. Poirot tucked the blue thread into his pocket. The scarf belonged to the visitor who argued with Jacques. This, he held up the thread, belongs to someone else entirely. But who? Poirot's eyes gleamed. A person who did not want to be seen. Someone who entered the shed. Someone who left after the visitor fled. And someone who may be watching us even now. A gust of wind slammed the shed door against the wall. The lantern flickered. Poirot did not flinch. "Inspecteur," he said quietly, "the killer is weaving a tapestry of confusion, but the more threads he introduces, the clearer the pattern becomes." Renaud swallowed. "And what pattern is that?" Poirot turned toward the storm-darkened runway. "One of espionage, hidden identities, and a crime far greater than a lover's quarrel." He stepped out into the rain, his silhouette framed by lightning. "Come, mon ami, the night grows short, and our killer grows bold." Chapter 5. The Mechanic Who Vanished. The storm had begun to weaken by the time Poirot and Inspector Renaud returned to the main hangar. The rain still fell, but now in narrow silver strands rather than violent sheets. The wind moaned across the empty airfield, a lament that echoed eerily between the hangars. Poirot stood in the doorway, examining the glistening runway as if it were a chessboard awaiting his next move. "Inspecteur," he asked without turning, "where is the mechanic, Monsieur Etienne Leclerc?" Renaud blinked in surprise. "Leclerc? Why, he's insignificant, a jittery boy with more grease than sense." "Nevertheless," Poirot replied, "I would speak with him." Renaud sighed. "Fine, I'll fetch him." But before he could step away, the hangar door creaked open and a young gendarme hurried inside, drenched from the storm. "Inspector, it's Leclerc. He's gone." Renaud spun around. "Gone? What do you mean, gone?" The young officer swallowed hard. "He did not report to the shelter when the storm worsened. We searched the mechanic's quarters. His tools are gone, his clothes as well, and a motorcycle is missing from the supply shed." Poirot's moustache twitched upward in grim satisfaction. "Ah," he murmured, "as I suspected." Renaud looked thunderstruck. "Poirot! Are you telling me this boy is our murderer?" Poirot lifted a hand. "No, my friend, but he is connected to the truth, and the truth, she terrifies him." The inspector slammed a fist into his palm. "We should send men to track him down. He can't have gone far in this storm." Poirot shook his head. "No, let him run. A frightened animal reveals more in flight than in capture." Renaud frowned, confused. What could he possibly be running from? Poirot paced slowly, his eyes shining with deduction. Guilt, perhaps, or fear of being blamed, or fear of someone else. Guichet paused, turning sharply toward the inspector. Monsieur Leclerc was the last to work on Delacroix's plane before the incident. He knows the machinery, the vulnerabilities, and above all, he knows who came near the aircraft tonight. Renaud's jaw tightened. "You think he saw something?" Poirot corrected him gently. "I think he saw someone." The detective walked to the far corner of the hangar, where a rack of flight equipment stood. He lifted a pair of goggles, turning them in the lantern light. "Tell me, Inspector," Poirot said quietly, "have you noticed how everyone we have questioned tonight gave us half-truths? Mademoiselle Arnaud hides the depth of her quarrel. The watchman hides his fear, and the mechanic, he hides himself entirely." Poirot set the goggles down. "When three people hide from the same thing," he whispered, "that thing must be very dangerous indeed." Renaud inhaled sharply. Espionage? Is that truly where your suspicions lie? Poirot gave a slight bow. Oui. The thread in the shed, the unknown visitor, the secret commission to Spain, the parcel. The pattern becomes clearer. He tapped his temple. This is no crime of passion. It is professional, organized, and Captain Delacroix, brave, talented, reckless, became entangled in matters beyond aviation. Renaud rubbed his temples. If that's true, we're dealing with something far more dangerous than a jealous lover. Poirot's voice dropped to a grave murmur. We are dealing with a web, and every person connected to this airfield stands at its center. He walked toward the side entrance, pushing it open. The rain had lightened into a mist, the world beyond soft and blurred. Come, Poirot said. We will search Leclerc's quarters. A man who flees always leaves behind a truth he could not bury. Renaud followed, muttering about the absurdity of the night's events. Together they navigated the gravel path toward the row of small workers' huts. The air tasted of wet earth and engine oil. Poirot entered Leclerc's hut first. It was modest, cramped, yet tidy, strangely tidy for a man known for dust and grease. The bed was neatly made, the small window left ajar. Only a few items remained: a cup, a dented tin plate, a coat too worn to take. Poirot moved with delicate precision, touching nothing until his eyes understood the space. There, he said, pointing to the desk. Renaud stepped forward. What am I looking at? On the wooden surface lay a torn photograph. Its edges were frayed, and water from the leak above had blurred much of the ink. But the faces remained intact. Delacroix, Leclerc. And a third figure, a woman in aviation goggles, smiling, her arm around Delacroix's waist. Renaud's brows shot upward. Who is she? Poirot took the photograph gently, studying the woman's grin, an aviatrix clearly, and one who knew Delacroix well. He turned the photo over. A message was written in Chichortian, English, to Jacques, for our next crossing. Keep the skies brave. E. Caldwell. Renaud exhaled. An American, the woman Madeleine mentioned. Poirot nodded slowly. Yes, the rumoured companion in Casablanca. He tapped at the desk lightly. Leclerc kept this hidden, meaning he had a connection to her, or feared the consequences of that connection. Poirot stood still for a long moment, letting the pieces shift into order. At last, he said softly, we begin to see the shadows of our invisible woman. Renaud looked unsettled. You think she was the one at the plane? Poirot smiled faintly. My friend, at this moment I suspect everything and nothing. But I know this. The woman in the photograph has not vanished from Delacroix's life. She has merely stepped behind the curtain. Renaud clenched his fists. Poirot, this case is spiraling. A dead aviator, a missing mechanic, spies, mysterious women. What are we even chasing anymore? Poirot placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. We are chasing the truth, mon ami, and she is always worth the pursuit. He walked back to the doorway, gazing out into the thinning rain. Tonight, Captain Delacroix was not killed because he loved unwisely. He was killed because he knew something worth silencing. His voice dropped to a whisper, and the person who silenced him is still here, hiding in the storm. Chapter 6. The Letter in the Fuel Drum. The first pale hints of dawn had begun to smear across the horizon, turning the storm clouds to bruised violet. The airfield lay drenched and quiet, like a battlefield after retreat. A thin river of water ran along the gravel path as Poirot and Inspector Renaud approached the fuel depot, a long, low shed that smelled of petrol and cold iron. Renaud folded his arms, shivering. "I don't understand, Poirot. Why are we here at this hour? We should be putting out warnings for the mechanic's escape." Poirot adjusted his hat. If Monsieur Leclerc fled, he fled because he could no longer abide proximity to the truth. And where does one hide truth? He gave a small, knowing nod toward the depot. "In plain sight, mon ami." Renaud groaned. "I should have known." Poirot pushed the depot door open. The hinges squealed, a thin metallic cry that echoed off the fuel drums lining the walls. The interior was dark except for the beam of Poirot's lantern. Its yellow glow cast long shadows that shuddered with each flicker. Poirot walked slowly between the rows of drums, fingertips hovering just above the cool metal. "Do not touch anything," Renaud said automatically. Poirot smiled. "I never touch, unless I must touch." He paused before a drum marked with a large red X. "Curious," Renaud frowned. "It's marked for disposal. Old stock, nothing important." Poirot's moustache twitched. "I disagree, mon ami. A mechanic on the run would not bother with new fuel. But a hiding place? Something he wished to conceal?" He rapped his knuckles on the drum. The sound was dull, too dull. Poirot and Renaud exchanged a look. Poirot lifted a crowbar from a nearby workbench. He wedged it carefully under the lid's edge and applied a measured pressure. With a groaning pop, the lid gave way. There was no fuel inside. Instead, rags, wadded newspaper, and a small oilcloth parcel tied with string. Renaud exhaled sharply. "Well, that's not suspicious at all." Poirot set the crowbar aside and lifted the parcel with delicate fingertips, as though handling a wounded bird. The string was knotted tightly, too tightly for trembling hands like Leclerc's to have tied quickly. "Perhaps he hid this long ago," Poirot murmured. He untied the string and unfolded the oilcloth. Inside lay a folded letter, a small flat metal disc, and a torn piece of map, stained with oil. Poirot opened the letter first. It was in English, written in a confident but hurried hand. Renaud leaned over his shoulder as Poirot read, "Jacques, if you insist on this mission, you must avoid the southern route. You know who watches those waters. I cannot protect you there, not this time. Burn this letter, burn everything, trust no one." E.C. Renaud let out a low whistle. "E.C., the American woman." Poirot nodded. "Elise Caldwell." Renaud paced. "So she did warn him. She wasn't part of the plot. She was trying to help." Poirot tilted his head. Perhaps. Or perhaps she wished him alive for her own designs. Affection and ambition, they make a dangerous cocktail. He examined the metal disc next. It was stamped with an insignia. A winged lion encircled by laurel leaves. Renaud squinted. "That's no French emblem." "Indeed," Poirot said. "It is Italian. A symbol often associated with diplomatic couriers and covert operations." He turned the disc over, and here, engraved initials A.V. "A.V.," Renaud repeated. "Who is that?" Poirot folded the letter again. "A question for which we will soon have an answer." The map fragment came last. It depicted a small portion of the Moroccan coastline, with a point circled in red. "A cove," Renaud muttered. "Remote, hard to reach, used by fishermen sometimes." Poirot's eyes hardened. "Used by smugglers, more often." He rose to his feet, holding the three items like pieces of a puzzle whose edges had begun to fit. "Inspector," Poirot said softly, "something about Captain Delacroix's final flight does not align. He was not simply ferrying a parcel. He was entangled in a clandestine operation, one involving foreign agents, coded insignia, and now—" He held up the torn map. "A secret rendezvous point." Renaud's voice dropped to a whisper. "Poirot, do you think Delacroix was working for a foreign power?" Poirot shook his head gently. No, not for, but against. And that, mon ami, is what cost him his life. The wind outside howled, rattling the depot door. Poirot continued. Someone here at the airfield knew of his involvement. Someone who feared exposure. Someone who ensured he would never make that flight. Renaud clenched his fists. You think the killer is one of us? Poirot gave a small, solemn nod. I fear so. He paced in a slow circle. Let us consider the facts. A secret letter from an American aviatrix. An Italian diplomatic marker. A rendezvous point used for clandestine dealings. A mechanic who vanishes at the moment of truth. And a dead aviator whose final argument was with a woman. He lifted a finger, but not the woman we assumed. Renaud stared. You mean it wasn't Madeleine? Poirot stopped pacing. The watchman saw a woman in a coat, Poirot said. He assumed it was the captain's companion. But tell me, does a spy dress in bright French fashion? A beat of silence. No, Renaud whispered. She would dress plainly, practically, in the kind of coat a worker might wear. Poirot finished the thought. Just like Elise Caldwell. The inspector paled. But she's in Casablanca. Poirot cut him off gently. Perhaps, or perhaps she came earlier than anyone realized. He held up the metal disc. This tells me she was not merely an aviatrix. She was something else entirely. The wind died. A tense stillness settled over the depot. Poirot placed the items carefully back into the parcel. It is time, he said, that we seek the woman in the photograph. Whether she is hero, villain, or victim, we must know. Renaud nodded grimly. And Leclerc? Poirot's gaze sharpened. He ran not because he was guilty, but because he was afraid of the same person who killed Delacroix. He paused. And if that person is still nearby, the boy may not live long unless we find him. Renaud swallowed hard. So what now? Poirot extinguished his lantern and stepped toward the dawnlit doorway. Now, mon ami, he said, we go to Casablanca. Chapter 7. The Woman in the Photograph. The road to Casablanca shimmered under the rising sun, a ribbon of gold stretching into the distance. Poirot sat comfortably in the rear seat of the police motor car, fingers steepled, the oilcloth parcel resting in his lap like a fragile relic. Inspector Renaud drove with the stiff impatience of a man who longed for a simpler crime, something that did not twist itself into diplomatic knots and disappear into shadows. Poirot, Renaud called over the engine's hum. This woman, Elise Caldwell. You're certain she's involved? Poirot's eyes remained fixed on the horizon. Involved, yes. Guilty, we shall see. It is rare, mon ami, for a woman to warn a man of danger unless she knows its precise nature. And it is rarer still for a pilot of Delacroix's experience to follow the wrong route unless he was forced. Renaud frowned. Forced? By a rival? Agent? Poirot nodded, though his gaze stayed distant. Or by someone who wished to ensure the plane and its cargo never arrived. He tapped the metal disc inside the parcel. This, I believe, is the key. The initials AV, a signet of Italian intelligence. But why would Captain Delacroix have it? And why would Miss Caldwell warn him about the southern route, unless she knew who controlled it? Renaud exhaled sharply. So the captain was caught between powers. Exactly. Poirot sat back, a most untenable position. By the late morning, Casablanca spread before them. White buildings gleaming under the Moroccan sun, the harbour bustling with fishing boats and merchant vessels. The city pulsed with life. Merchants calling from stalls, the scent of spices mixing with salt air, and the hum of 100 conversations in French, Arabic, Spanish, and English. They parked near the coastal promenade. Poirot, stepping out, adjusted his tie and smoothed his moustache. "First, mon ami," he said to Renaud, "we go to the Hotel Cervantes. It is where Miss Caldwell stays when she visits Casablanca. The concierge there, he remembers everything, like the elephant, but with better grooming." The lobby of the Hotel Cervantes was cool and shaded, the scent of polished wood lingering in the air. The concierge, a slim man with a precise moustache of his own, recognized Poirot instantly. "Monsieur Poirot," he said with a slight bow. "A pleasure as always. You honor our establishment." Poirot inclined his head. "My gratitude, Monsieur Lefebvre. We require only information. A certain Elise Caldwell stayed here recently?" "Oui, monsieur. She departed yesterday morning." Renaud groaned. "We just missed her." "But," Lefebvre added, "she did leave a message for someone. She said the gentleman would know where to find her." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "May we see this message?" Lefebvre produced a small envelope. Poirot opened it carefully. Inside was a single card with a name and nothing more. Alessandro Virelli. Poirot's breath stilled. Renaud leaned over the card. "A.V., the same initials as the metal disc." "Yes," Poirot whispered. "And Virelli, an Italian envoy, stationed in Casablanca. A man of certain, how do you say, ambiguous loyalties. Do you think Caldwell went to him?" Poirot folded the card. "I think she ran to the only person who could keep her alive." The Italian consulate occupied a pale stone building near the edge of the harbour. Guards in crisp uniforms stood at its entrance. One recognized Poirot, and, after a brief exchange, allowed them inside. The waiting chamber was cool, with marble floors and tall windows that filtered in the bright Mediterranean light. Minutes later, the consul himself emerged. Alessandro Virelli was a tall man, elegantly dressed, with silver threaded lightly through his dark hair. His expression was the calm, polished mask of a diplomat, but his eyes were sharp. "Monsieur Poirot," he greeted with a smooth Italian accent, "to what do I owe the honor?" Poirot offered a polite nod. "We seek information regarding Mademoiselle Elise Caldwell. We were told she visited you." Virelli's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, a flicker of hesitation before the mask returned. "She did." Renaud stepped forward. "We need to speak with her." "That is not possible." "Why not?" Renaud demanded. Virelli folded his hands. "Because she left last night, in haste." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "To where?" "That," Virelli said gently, "I am not at liberty to reveal." Poirot watched him carefully, the slight tightening of the jaw, the smallest tension in the shoulders. "She is in danger," Poirot said, "grave danger, and so, Signor Virelli, are you, if you continue to withhold the truth." A drop of silence fell between them. Finally, Virelli sighed. "Very well." He gestured toward a private room. Inside, with the door closed, Virelli lowered his voice. "Caldwell came to me because she feared she was being followed. She had information, dangerous information, about a smuggling ring operating between Tangier and the Moroccan coast." Poirot nodded, and Captain Delacroix. "He intruded into something he was never meant to see." Virelli's face tightened. He was a good man, but once he learned of the operation, his fate was sealed. Renaud crossed his arms. "So who killed him?" Virelli hesitated. "Then, there is a name whispered among my circles," he said. "A woman, a handler for the smuggling ring, ruthless, capable of murder, known only as La Sirène." Poirot's brows lifted. "The siren? Because men follow her," Virelli said softly, "even when it leads them to their deaths." Poirot stood very still. "And where," he asked quietly, "is Elisa Caldwell now?" Virelli handed him a folded piece of paper. "She left this for you," she said. "Only you would understand." Poirot opened it. Inside was a single line. "The truth hides where the tide sings. Ici." Poirot inhaled sharply. Renaud peered over his shoulder. What on earth does that mean? Poirot closed the paper. "It means," he said, "that Miss Caldwell is waiting for us at the cove marked on the torn map." He turned toward the door. "And if La Sirène truly exists, she will not let us reach Elise alive." Chapter 8. The cove where the tide sings. The sun was sinking toward the horizon when Poirot and Inspector Renaud reached the rugged coastline north of Casablanca. The path to the cove twisted downward through jagged rocks and wild brush, the air thick with salt and cooling wind. Below them, waves crashed against the stone in rhythmic surges, a deep, echoing roar that rose and fell like a chant. Renaud carefully navigated the narrow descent. "Tide sings," she wrote, he muttered. "Is that what she meant? This noise?" Poirot nodded slowly, gripping his cane. "The sirens of old, mon ami, sang to lure sailors to their doom. What else sings but the sea, and those who use its music for their purposes?" Renaud shuddered. "La Sirène." Poirot said nothing. They reached the cove floor just as the sky shifted to a molten orange, streaked with violet. The waves here funneled into a hollow near the cliff wall, producing a long, ghostly whistle, the cove's eerie song. Renaud scanned the area. "I see no one. Not the Caldwell woman. Not anyone." Poirot, eyes narrowed, studied the ground. "Patience. Observe." Near a cluster of boulders lay footprints, some fresh, some partially washed by the tide. A set led toward the cliff face. Poirot approached, lifting his lantern. Embedded in the rock was a narrow opening, almost invisible unless one stood close. The wind sighed through it, carrying the smell of damp stone and something else. Perfume! A woman's perfume! Poirot inhaled deeply. "She is here," Renaud tensed. "Or someone else's." Poirot raised the lantern higher. The beam illuminated a short passage leading into darkness. "Come," he said, "but tread softly. Evil prefers the shadows." Inside, the cave widened to a hidden chamber. The lantern's glow bounced off the stone walls, revealing crates stacked against one side, marked with foreign seals, and bundles wrapped in cloth and twine. Smuggled goods. Renaud cursed under his breath. So Virelli was right. This is a smuggler's den. Poirot examined the nearest crate. Guns, ammunition, a formidable supply. "And enough to fund a war," Renaud murmured, horrified. From the far corner of the chamber came a soft sound, like a muffled gasp. Poirot turned sharply. "Mademoiselle Caldwell!" A figure stepped into the lantern's light. Elise Caldwell, pale, trembling, but alive. Her hair was wind-tossed, her coat torn at the sleeve. Yet her eyes were fierce, burning with fear and defiance. "Poirot!" she whispered. "Thank God!" Renaud lowered his pistol slightly. "You should not have run." She shook her head. "If I hadn't, they would have killed me before I reached you." Poirot approached slowly. "Mademoiselle, you left a trail that only the careful eye could follow." "Why come to the cove?" "Because," she said, voice breaking, "this is where she meets her couriers." "La Sirène," Poirot said softly. Elise nodded. "She controls this cove, this route, this entire ring." Poirot studied her closely. "And you, what is your role in this, mademoiselle?" For a moment, she said nothing. Then, "I was a courier once, before I knew what I carried, before I understood what she was doing." Renaud sucked in a sharp breath. "You were a spy? I was a pilot with debts. she replied bitterly. And she exploited that. She recruited me, used me. Poirot tilted his head. And Captain Delacroix? Her voice trembled. He found out. I warned him not to take the southern route, because her men control those waters. I begged him to stay away. Poirot's voice was gentle, and instead he died. Elise turned away, tears streaking her cheeks. Yes, she whispered, because someone at the airfield betrayed him. Someone who knew he was meeting me. Someone who knew he carried that metal insignia. Poirot's eyes sharpened. Who? She swallowed hard. I don't know, but I know La Sirène ordered it. The cave suddenly echoed with footsteps, several of them. Renaud whipped around, gun raised. We're not alone! Poirot blew out the lantern instantly, plunging them into near darkness. Only the faintest light seeped in from the cave mouth. Stay close, Poirot whispered. Shadows moved at the entrance. A woman's voice, cold and melodic, drifted into the chamber. Well, well, the famous Hercule Poirot, and my troublesome little bird. Elise froze. She's here. La Sirène stepped forward, flanked by 2 armed men. She was nothing like the monstrous figure Renaud had imagined. She was poised, elegant, her movements fluid as silk. Her eyes shimmered like polished obsidian, beautiful, dangerous, unreadable. You have meddled enough, she said softly, almost tenderly, all of you. Poirot stepped between her and Elise. Madame, murder rarely benefits its architect for long. She smiled faintly. And yet it has served me admirably thus far. Renaud kept his pistol trained on her. You are under arrest. She laughed, a low, haunting sound. You think I fear prison? I have men in every port from Tangier to Marseille. Poirot's voice was calm. And yet, madame, for all your power, you are reckless. You killed Captain Delacroix, and in doing so, you left behind a trail of clues. Her eyes narrowed. Delacroix was weak. He hesitated. A man who hesitates is a man who talks. And now, Poirot asked, you intend to silence Mademoiselle Caldwell? Elise stiffened. La Sirène's smile widened. She knows too much. Poirot stepped forward, gaze unblinking. Then you have made a grave error, because now Hercule Poirot knows too much. For the first time, her expression faltered. A single gunshot exploded through the chamber, Renaud firing a warning shot that struck the cave wall inches from her feet. The echo shook the chamber like thunder. La Sirène's 2 guards tensed, then charged. Renaud tackled one, knocking his weapon aside. Poirot grabbed Elise, pulling her behind a crate for cover. The second guard lunged toward them, but a crashing wave surged into the cave at that moment, as if the sea itself intervened. The man stumbled in the rushing water. Elise snatched up a fallen lantern and swung it hard, striking him across the face. He collapsed with a groan. La Sirène, seeing her advantage slipping, bolted toward a hidden exit at the back of the cave. Renaud shouted, Poirot! She's getting away! Poirot helped Elise to her feet. Go after her, Inspector. The way is clear. I will secure the girl. Renaud sprinted after the fleeing siren, disappearing into the darkness. Poirot exhaled slowly, the roar of the sea rising behind him. Mademoiselle Caldwell, he said softly, the game has changed. She nodded, terrified but resolute. Yes, she whispered, and now the real hunt begins. Chapter 9. A Chase Through the Siren's Labyrinth. The hidden passage behind the cave twisted like the throat of some ancient beast, narrow, slippery, and shuddering with the echo of retreating footsteps. Renaud sprinted through it, the sharp slap of his boots reverberating off the walls, lantern swinging wildly in his grip. La Sirène! He shouted, breath ragged. Stop! But the only answer was the haunting drip of water, the hiss of sea spray forcing its way through cracks in the stone, and her fading footsteps, light, swift, confident. Behind him, farther down the tunnel, came Poirot's steady voice. "Do not lose her, mon ami. She knows the final truth." Renaud pushed harder. The passage forked. To the right, darkness. To the left, a faint glimmer of orange light. Renaud turned left. He burst into a cavern that opened high above the water, torches flickering along the walls. An old smuggler's route, long unused except by those who wished to remain unseen. Below, waves crashed violently against jagged rocks, sending mist upward like cold fingers. La Sirène stood at the cavern's edge, the wind tugging at her dark coat, her hair whipping in the gusts like a banner of defiance. In the torchlight, her beauty sharpened into something terrifying. "You cannot win," she said softly as Renaud approached. "You should have stayed out of this, Inspector." Renaud raised his pistol. "It's over. Step away from the ledge." She smiled, that serene, disarming smile that had lured countless men to ruin. "You truly believe he came here for you?" she murmured. Renaud blinked. "What? La petite Américaine," she continued, eyes glittering. "Elise, you think her innocent? How charming." Renaud's grip tightened. "Enough! Hands where I can see. She lied to you all," La Sirène went on. "I had no reason to kill Delacroix. She did." A chill cut through Renaud. "You're lying." "Am I?" She tilted her head. "She told you she warned him, did she not? Warned him about me, about smugglers, about a route." She lifted a finger. "Ask yourself, Inspector, why would she know that route at all, unless she was the one who planned it?" Renaud's heart thudded. "No," Poirot said. La Sirène laughed. "Poirot sees much, but even he can be misled when a pretty face trembles in fear." Renaud swallowed hard. Just then, quick footsteps sounded behind him. Poirot emerged from the passage, breathless but composed, lantern raised. "Enough, madame," he said firmly. "Your veil of deception ends here." La Sirène arched a brow. "You believe her story, Monsieur Poirot? The trembling dove who pretends to have been forced into my service?" Poirot's eyes sharpened. "Oui, because she trembles not with guilt, but with the terror of a woman long hunted. You, madame, mistake survival for deceit." La Sirène's face hardened. Poirot stepped forward, moustache bristling. "You speak of Elise's warnings, yet if she were guilty, why warn Delacroix at all? Why direct us to this cove, a place that incriminates herself? No, madame, only one truth fits the pattern. Elise fled you." He raised the metal disc they had found in the fuel drum. "And you wanted this back, didn't you? This Italian insignia, the token of your partner, Alessandro Virelli." A flicker of anger crossed her eyes, quickly masked. "Yes," Poirot said softly. "The great Alessandro Virelli. Your ally, your patron, your lover perhaps. You used Elise as a courier to shift weapons. Delacroix discovered the truth, and you ensured his silence forever." Renaud felt the tension snap like a wire. He steadied his gun. La Sirène stepped dangerously close to the cliff's edge. "You think you understand the game, little Belgian, but you never saw the final move." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "And what move is that?" La Sirène spread her arms, the wind swirling around her like a dark halo. "That I never intended to escape." Before either man could react, she reached into her coat and flung something small and metallic into the air. Poirot recognized it instantly. "A flare gun!" "No!" he cried. The flare exploded upward, red, furious, illuminating the cavern in a blood-colored blaze. And from far out at sea, a motorboat roared to life. Renaud cursed. "She has accomplices!" The siren laughed, triumphant. "I do not run from justice, gentlemen. I simply rise above it." She took a step backward, and fell. Her dark silhouette vanished into the roaring void below. The waves swallowed her with a single thunderous crash. Renaud rushed to the ledge. "Mon Dieu, she's gone!" Poirot stood beside him, lantern trembling faintly in his hand. His face was grave, solemn in a way Renaud had rarely seen. "She chose her own fate," Poirot said quietly, "like the sailors of myth who could not resist the call of the sea." Renaud shook his head. Do you think she survived?" Poirot looked down into the churning waters. La Sirène was many things, but mortal she most certainly was. The sea does not return its dead. Another explosion echoed across the water, the motorboat speeding away with the flare as its beacon. Poirot murmured, "But her accomplices, they live, and they carry the final secrets." Renaud holstered his pistol. "We must go back. Elise, she'll be terrified." Poirot nodded. "And she deserves the full truth." As they retraced their steps through the winding tunnel, the final echo of La Sirène's laughter seemed to cling to the stone, faint, mocking, and fading with every step. Outside, the night had settled. The tide's eerie song was louder now. Morning or warning, it was impossible to tell. Poirot paused at the entrance of the cove, lantern held high. "Inspector," he said softly, "the case is not yet ended. La Sirène is dead, but another hand guided this scheme, a hand far more subtle." Renaud frowned. "You mean Virelli?" Poirot shook his head slowly. "No, mon ami, not Virelli. Someone closer, someone at the airfield." The lantern flame flickered violently, as though the wind itself gasped. "There is," Poirot said in a low voice, "a second traitor." Chapter 10. The Unmasking at the Airfield. The return to the Casablanca airfield was quieter than expected. Dawn's light washed over the tarmac, revealing the lingering puddles of the storm, the twisted footprints, and the silent hangars, each a potential witness to secrets still hidden. Poirot walked slowly, deliberately, lantern tucked under his arm. Inspector Renaud trailed, alert, fatigued, and still shaken from the night's pursuit. "Mademoiselle Caldwell is safe?" Renaud asked, breaking the silence. Poirot nodded. "Oui, but safety is relative, mon ami. Danger lingers where trust is misplaced." They approached the main hangar. The place was empty, except for the mechanics and the foreman, who looked nervous, wiping his hands on a rag. Poirot's sharp eyes immediately noted small discrepancies. A glove tucked behind a crate, a subtle scuff on the floor, footprints partially washed by the previous night's rain. The pieces were here, waiting, but still the culprit had eluded full exposure. Poirot addressed the group. "Messieurs, I require your attention, all of you who were present the night of Captain Delacroix's death." A murmur rippled through the room. The watchman, Karim, shifted uneasily. Leclerc was conspicuously absent, likely hiding, as Poirot had anticipated. The remaining men stiffened. Poirot stepped forward, hands clasped. The death of Captain Delacroix was not an accident, it was murder. A murder that required opportunity, knowledge of the hangar, and an intimate understanding of his aircraft. In short, someone among you knew precisely what they were doing. The mechanics exchanged wary glances. Poirot continued, "Let us recount the facts. Delacroix argued with a woman at the plane. A warning letter was delivered by Mademoiselle Caldwell. A metal disc bearing the initials AV was hidden. Footprints led to the storage sheds. And, most crucially, the torn scarf was not from Mademoiselle Caldwell." The room was silent. Poirot moved closer to the foreman, a stout man with ink-stained fingers. "Monsieur Lefebvre, you were in charge of the night's operations. You alone had the freedom to move between hangars unobserved, and yet You claim ignorance?" The foreman swallowed hard. I don't know what you mean, Monsieur Poirot." Poirot's small eyes glinted. "Ah, but you do. You were jealous of Captain Delacroix. Not because of a woman, but because of ambition. Delacroix was to be the pilot for a lucrative commission to Spain, a flight that could secure contracts and prestige. And you, Monsieur Lefebvre, coveted such opportunity." The foreman's face turned red, then pale. You tampered with his plane," Poirot said firmly, "using a tool only a mechanic would know, with intent to delay or destroy. And you were careful, yes, careful, but careless enough to leave a clue. The second set of footprints, near the storage shed. You hoped we would blame a stranger, a phantom." The foreman's hands shook. It was not supposed to happen. I only wanted to sabotage the flight. I never meant he was killed." Poirot's voice was measured, cold as steel. "Intent, monsieur, is irrelevant to justice. You acted, and a man died. You left another to warn him, the American woman, Elise Caldwell. You did not anticipate her intervention. You did not anticipate La Sirene's presence either." A collective gasp rose. Renaud stepped forward, astonished. "So Lefebvre is the traitor at the airfield?" Poirot inclined his head. "Yes, he acted for greed, but in the web of espionage, greed is as lethal as malice." He paused, letting the weight of revelation settle over the group. "And La Sirène," Poirot said, "was eliminated by her own recklessness. But she was not the final piece of this puzzle. Lefebvre, your betrayal intertwined with her schemes, and you facilitated her access by not reporting her presence. You hid her tracks, unconsciously or deliberately. Thus you became complicit." The foreman dropped to his knees, head in his hands. I did not mean for it to happen." Poirot regarded him with calm authority. "Intent matters little. Consequence matters more. You have confessed, and justice will follow." Renaud moved to place Lefebvre under arrest, his face a mixture of relief and disbelief. "So it was one of our own, hiding behind the shadows." Poirot nodded. "Indeed, the killer often wears the mask of familiarity. We look outward for danger when it hides within." Turning toward Elise Caldwell, who had been standing silently at the edge of the hangar, Poirot smiled faintly. "And you, mademoiselle, your courage saved Captain Delacroix in another sense. You warned him, you revealed the hidden path, and you stayed true even when all seemed lost." She breathed out, shoulders relaxing. "I only wish I could have saved him." "Sometimes," Poirot said softly, "the value of an act is not measured in what is prevented, but in what is revealed. And your revelations brought the truth to light." Renaud looked at Poirot. "And the disc, the metal, insignia?" Poirot held it aloft. "A relic of Virelli's operations. Lefebvre tried to use it to cover his interference with Delacroix's flight. But symbols, like all lies, have a habit of exposing themselves to those who see clearly." Renaud shook his head. "It's all so tangled." "Oui," Poirot said. "Life is often tangled, Inspector. But the human heart, and the little grey cells, will always find the thread that leads to clarity." He glanced around the hangar, at the silent men, at the scattered evidence, and at the morning sun glinting across the puddles. "And now," he said, "we ensure that justice is administered. Lefebvre will answer for his actions. La Sirene's accomplices, if they survive, will be pursued. And Mademoiselle Caldwell may finally rest from the dangers that have shadowed her." Elise nodded, eyes glistening. "Merci, Monsieur Poirot." Poirot inclined his head, the corners of his mouth lifting slightly. Justice is not merely the punishment of wrongdoing. It is also the illumination of truth. Renaud turned to leave, exhaling a long breath. I suppose the case is closed. Poirot followed him slowly. Closed, yes, but the world is full of secrets, mon ami. And even when a case is solved, another waits patiently in the shadows. He paused at the doorway, looking out at the wide expanse of the airfield, the sea beyond, and the sky turning a clear, brilliant blue. Captain Delacroix is gone, Poirot murmured. But the lesson remains: vigilance, observation, and understanding the nature of man. These are the true instruments of justice. Renaud looked at him, tired but impressed. And Hercule Poirot, as always, the finest instrument of all. Poirot smiled faintly, moustache twitching. Merci, mon ami. But the finest instrument is not myself. It is the truth, and it is always worth the pursuit. The sun rose higher over Casablanca, gilding the hangars and the tarmac with golden light. The storm had passed, leaving clarity in its wake. And in the calm that followed, justice had finally been served. The case of Captain Delacroix, the mysterious parcel, the American aviatrix and La Sirene's shadowy schemes was concluded. Yet Poirot knew that somewhere, beyond the horizon, another secret waited patiently for discovery. With a final glance at the airfield, he adjusted his tie, lifted his chin and turned toward the city. The day was young, and the little grey cells were already thinking.